President, this is at least the 5th time you've turned off airstrikes against Iran since April to negotiate. What is your message to the American people who are wondering what has changed this time? Why should it be any different?
Well, you don't know. I don't know. I think we're going to maybe get something, but I want to give them every last chance before decapitation.
Here we go again. Trump visiting the Waffle House. We're going to make peace. We're going to decapitate them. Joe, I'm going to ask you about that in a second, but I want to give you 2 quotes from Reuters today that are so important about how we're running out of missiles and get your reaction to that as well. So Reuters reporting today, the U.S. Army has used up much of its global stockpile of highly accurate long-range missiles during its 5-month war with Iran, according to 3 people familiar with the data, raising concerns about the military's readiness for future conflicts. I would imagine so. Here's some details. The missiles are principally the Army's surface-to-surface weapons known as Army Tactical Missile Systems and Precision Strike Missiles. The U.S. has used virtually all of these weapons, according to 2 other sources. And of course, the administration says, oh, no, that's nonsense. Of course, that's what they said about casualty figures. That's what they said about defensive missiles. But they say the United States has far more munitions than anyone in the world, far more than we need. Our defense companies are at this moment making more munitions than they have ever made before. Well, I wonder why. In addition to expanding their plants and equipment at record levels. So, Joe Kent, you are the former director of national counterterrorism. What do you make of this story out of Reuters that we might be running out of these missiles? Does it sound accurate to you?
You know, it's always hard to tell. It sounds accurate to me because for years now, we've been sending these types of weapon systems like they grow on trees to Ukraine, not planning for potentially getting involved into a conventional conflict. So to me, it makes sense that we're running short of some of these more high-end missile systems. Another possibility, too, is that this was leaked deliberately and it's a bit of misinformation to make it seem like, you know, we're up against some kind of a restraint in order to strengthen President Trump's hands so we could have that element of surprise to go on the offense. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. What I think is more likely is that you have people within the Pentagon who are very concerned that we are pursuing conflict with a reckless abandon and they are not being listened to by the administration. So therefore, they are taking the risk and leaking this to the press.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So there's that theory out there that this might portend ground troops. So let me tell the audience a little bit more about that and then come back and analyze it with you. So Reuters further explains the long-range munitions, which this is amazing, which cost more than $1 million each. This is an incredibly expensive war, are an important part of the military's arsenal, allowing accurate strikes from a safe distance. The U.S. supplied ATACMS, you'll have to tell me how to pronounce that, have played a key role in the war in Ukraine, allowing Ukrainian forces to attack targets inside Russia, just as Joe Kent was just telling you. The PRSM is newer, more advanced generation that will replace the ATACMs, which have a shorter range. Now, fourth person, they explained, familiar with the matter, said that despite the high usage of precision weapons, the U.S. can resupply. Central Command, which oversees U.S. forces in the Middle East, has been able to reload from U.S. military supplies around the world, the person said. But that seems to be a whole different problem because now we don't have them in places like Asia where, you know, China can take action and we would be very hamstrung, I believe. Again, we'll come back to Joe in a second on that. They say analysts agree that certain munitions, including artillery shells and several types of missiles, are being produced at record levels, but caution the supplies might fall short of what is needed for a prolonged war. Before I even get to our shortage on defensive missiles, Joe, first, it seems to me that if they're in a panic to produce more and more of these missiles, it might be because they're running out.
Yeah, that's the common sense. That's why I tend to lean towards there are folks in the Pentagon right now who are looking at what our inventories are and then what our burn rate, meaning how quickly we're firing these things inside of Iran and then how quickly we're shipping them to Ukraine. And they're saying, hey, boss, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary of War, we don't have enough of these. They're not being listened to. So therefore, they've said, well, now I'm going to take the risk and leak this to the press to hopefully get this through to the president. I am afraid, though, and maybe this is we'll get to this here in a second. I am afraid though, that as we run out of ATACMS and PRISMs and more sophisticated standoff weapons, that the Pentagon is then going to say to the president, hey, if you want to continue any kind of military operations, we need to get a foothold inside of Iran, or, maybe on one of the islands that Iran controls, so that we can shoot some of our less sophisticated weapon systems into Iran.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I just learned ATACMS and PRISMs, so I feel cooler already. Okay, so in terms of how to pronounce them. But okay, now on to the super serious stuff that you're alluding to. Today, we have 50,000 ground troops ready to go in the region, right? And Trump was talking about, World War II style attack. And in his mind, remember, he's super old, so he might think World War II is like Normandy Beach, right? And so one thing is, hey, we need to be on the land to fire the more conventional missiles. Another thing might be, well, look, since we're running out of missiles, let's be more effective, because guys on the ground can be a lot more effective in getting to the actual targets than these missiles. Have you seen that buzz anywhere else? Is there reason to believe that this could be marketing in that direction?
I'm very concerned about that. Yeah, actually, because if you watch Fox News and you look at the talking heads they're putting forth, General Keane, General Kellogg, these types who've been, screaming for months now that we need to do an Iwo Jima style landing on one of the islands or on the port of Bandar Abbas. That's what is continuing to be messaged to the president, because they know that he is watching Fox News. They know that he is listening, to people like the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Dubowitz, and these types who are encouraging the president to escalate. That combined with the Pentagon coming to him and saying, we are running low on the sophisticated munitions, we want further military operations, we need to get in closer to use what we have in our inventories. That to me could be a lethal combination. Plus the fact that President Trump is clearly frustrated by the fact that the Iranians are not giving him the diplomatic deal that he wants. And he is probably at some point, if he doesn't step back and say, hey, I just got to walk away from this thing, which I pray that he does. I don't think that he's going to do that, unfortunately. He's going to be left with more military options, and his military options are going to be limited because of the lack of sophisticated missile systems, which will put us right back at the Pentagon saying, well, all we've got left for you is short range, and for that, we need some kind of a foothold. That's how I think we could stumble blindly into boots on the ground.
Yeah, except it's not blind for some people, right, Joe? Because as you mentioned, the Dubowitz of the world, which no one in the real world knows, and has no effect and no followers, and get listened to in DC all the time. So I'm going to ask you a question that's kind of obvious to all of us, but in mainstream media would be scandalous. Why do they listen to Dubowitz? I mean, if he has absolutely zero followers, the neocons like him have been wrong every single time, and they got him into this mess in the first place. Why? What's the real reason anybody would listen to a dumbass like Dubowitz?
Well, I understand the skepticism, because had I not been in the Trump administration, I would have said, who's Mark Dubowitz, and why does anybody care what the FDD, think tank that's clearly funded by the Israeli government, who cares what they think? Yet President Trump is told that these are very credible people to listen to. We have two things kind of working against us. Number one, Miriam Adelson and a lot of the AIPAC pro-Israel lobbyists will come into President Trump, and they have access to him because they cut sizable checks to his campaign, so they have access to the president, and they will say, hey, this is a person that you should listen to. Another problem we have, and this is where the intelligence community really kind of shot itself in the foot in the first Trump administration, because of Russiagate, President Trump is very skeptical of things coming from the intelligence community. So when you'd have people like myself, or Deanna Gabbard, or just a person who no one knows their name, who's just a working level analyst, come in and brief the president, he's going to have a lot of skepticism, and then he's going to retreat back into the echo chamber where everyone tells him he's great, and he's a historic president for taking on the Iranians for the first time in 47 years, and then he's going to listen to General Kane, General Kellogg, Mark Dubowitz, and that's how we find ourselves in this situation, which I understand it does sound completely crazy, and had I not seen it myself firsthand, I wouldn't have believed that this is how we got here. But here we are. We do have to watch Fox News to see how President Trump's thinking is being influenced for very serious military decisions by people who have the worst of intentions.
Yeah, so Joe, I want to get back to the situation on the ground in a second, and then where is Donald Trump going to finally land on the menu at the Waffle House? But first, what you just said is really important, so I want to stay on it for a second. I've never quite figured out, and you worked inside the Trump administration, so obviously you have better insight into it. Is Donald Trump really that unsophisticated? And he really, when Miriam comes in and says, "Oh, this Dubowitz guy is, he's the eminent, expert on this," and the Mossad agent comes into the Situation Room or zooms in, and Netanyahu comes in and they give him all this load of crap. Does he actually believe it? And is he really that, having covered politics, there's no way I would believe any of that, but I understand that I know way more than President Trump does in terms of policy and the different players in Washington, et cetera. Or is he just transactional? And he thinks, yeah, I know Dubowitz and Miriam don't know a thing about this and are probably lying to me, but Miriam gave me a lot of money and Bibi has the tapes. And so which one is it? Is he really that shallow, or is he transactional and he just uses it as an excuse?
This is the question. And so at the beginning of the Trump administration, I believe that Trump was utterly uninterested in getting involved in this war. He understood, and this is the guy who called out Jeb Bush on the debate stage in 2016. Regardless of some of the mistakes that were made in the first administration, he didn't get us involved in any new foreign wars. So at the beginning of the administration, when the Israelis came with their pitch about how we needed to go take down the regime, he seemed very uninterested in it. And then something changed around the spring, early summertime of 2025, and we just didn't have it within us to hold the Israelis back. We could have held them back from the 12-day war. We knew exactly what they wanted, and we had the ability to take away some features of the defense that we give them so that they wouldn't have the capability to go on the offense against Iran. But we didn't have the will to do it. Trump tried to do, midnight hammer to take it off the table, but then the Israelis just kept coming back, and he couldn't say no to them. And for the